Here we go. We're kicking it off today with what I feel to be a very successful example, and I show you this one not to intimidate you in case you struggled with this particular exercise, because you wouldn't be the only one, but rather to show you some of the successes and also even how to improve upon what's already a really strong set of shots in just a couple little ways. This take I thought was a great success, and there are just a few things I want to call out that it has in common with a number of the submissions that I looked at, just to offer you some other ideas. Now, some things I like here: the integration of the effects elements while keeping them really stylized, I think is working great. I like the animation. I like the effects animation. I think the key on her is good. Her look is interesting. And yeah, there's more good things I could say about this. But I want to focus a little bit on this, I guess you'd call it a camera move. In fact, what the student did was animate the anchor point and scale. You can see the keyframes down here. I'll close the adjustment layer so it doesn't draw your attention away. And we can look at the graph editor for these. I'll switch to a value graph so you can see what's happening with the anchor point and scale on these. And that is causing what I think is intended to be a handheld camera look. However, for me, and let me drop down to quarter res here to see if I can kind of... There's something I noticed about this and about the other ones like it that I had a personal problem with. And you may not have a problem, but I do at least want to point out what's kind of wrong about this. So this type of shot would not be accomplished by zooming. So that right there, that is a zoom. And the proof of that is it's being accomplished with a scale animation. Zooming is effectively scaling the frame. I mean, you zoom a lens, and what happens is the perspective doesn't change at all, just the framing, right? We've gone over this, and you probably already knew it. Now, the thing about that is it really took me out of the scene because it just looks really unnatural. You would never see this cinematically. It's not a thing you can really do with a camera. I mean, I guess you could sit there and zoom back and forth, but really, honestly, the intention, I'm fairly certain, was a very stylized handheld camera. So I'm going to show you a little mock-up that I made of how you could achieve this. And certainly it is beyond anything you were supposed to know how to do for this lesson. But since a lot of people wanted this effect, I just wanted to point out kind of the difference and to show you that it is in some way achievable. Now, only a true After Effects nerd has the patience to do camera projection in this application, whereas our friends using Nuke have access to FBX files and all kinds of tools that are designed to do this. You really actually have to hack it over here. Let me give you an idea of what that looks like. I have a camera layer that's animated, and that's what's providing the motion. Let's take a peek into Custom View to see this, and I can rotate this around. So from the side, you can see my camera path there. So it's just weaving around using a wiggle expression, and I have it dart inward here in the middle. That's what the keyframes are doing. And then what you see here are three white solids in three-dimensional space, left, right, and bottom. And in the back there, you just see a background layer that's holding in what's at the end of the street down in the infinite distance. And so this is set up in such a way that the still is projected on there. And let me give you a quick idea how to do it. I don't expect you necessarily to be able to do this, but here are the key ingredients. I started actually with a projection camera, which is just in its static position. If I turn it on, you can see it's sitting back here where the other one starts, but just at the default position, and it doesn't move. And I even turned it off once I'd set up the scene. And then I have a slide, and let me just solo the two of those. Now the slide is set under rendering options, material options, to only cast shadows. So if I switch that to off or on, you'll see it, and you'll see that it's framed exactly in the field of view here. And then along with the camera, right alongside it and actually parented to it, is a projector light. That's just a point light that is in exactly the same position as the camera. So it is now effectively a projector. And then that slide layer being set to only cast shadows doesn't show up. And the reason that it shows up on these solids is that they, if I use the Uber key, are set to not accept lights, but they do have the default accept shadows on. So they accept shadows, but not lights. And that is how the magic happens. So again, we'll try to provide you with a scene so you can dissect it if you need to. But those are the basics. Now, this is obviously, if we go back and just take a look, not a perfect solution. So some things don't hold up as well. These street lights near the edge of the scene, not looking very 3D. They should be parallaxing more with what's behind them. However, remember in the Photoshop file, we do have them as separate layers. So in fact, if you were enough of a masochist, you could place them in this 3D world. That's where your patience really starts to get tested. So you wouldn't be projecting them. You'd actually be using the layers scaled and placed into the same scene. And any case, you don't get motion blur because this is projected onto surfaces, so there's no way to calculate that. So far from flawless, but kind of fun. Couple nitpicks here. One, the dumpster, which is well animated and handled and has some nice motion blur and so on when it gets thrown, doesn't participate in the halftone. And so I would suggest this kind of makes it stand out in an undesirable way. And I would just kind of slide it down so that it's below that halftone. And you can create a halftone, of course, in After Effects, but you don't even have to go that far. It is an old school, very old school, like oldest of old school effect in here. Finally, the dust or smoke where it comes up behind her. Let's see if I can find it. It is behind her. So I would have liked to see that both in front and behind. And that would be just by probably screening that over her, since it's a very light element. And I would say that the ground crack is a little slow. So just isolating these elements for a second, there's just a delay with the thing breaking up. I'm not saying that the element actually has to run faster, but the physics and the cartoon physics of the scene demand that there not be that lag of a few frames before things start to go. Let's take a look at another example. So there are a couple of things in here that I think point to my not being clear enough. So I'm going to clarify those for you. And by the way, this student did get the halftone over the bin, whatever you call this thing. And so let's take a look at the ground cracks, which I was compositing with an overlay mode. However, that fails if there's no matte. So we'll go into the pre-comp, and I'm just going to reveal this in the project, and just next to it, among all these files that you got, is the matte. So I'll put that in there. Actually, here I'm going to duplicate it and replace it. So Command Option / and there, that way it has the exact same position. I see that it's set to overlay here in this comp, but that's not going to be passed through unless Collapse Transformations is on. Anyway, I wouldn't do it that way. Instead, I'm going to set this as a Luma matte. And back here in the main comp, there's a bit of a matte line, but we can fix it. I'm going to actually just go ahead and do a simple choker on here and raise that just a little bit. As you know, I don't like adaptive resolution. So in this case, I can kind of dial it in. I think the levels is a little too heavy, but we can kind of try to match the ground plane there. I see the effort of that. And somewhere in there is the sweet spot for this ground crack element. Next, let's take a look at the street lamp. And so this was pretty common, that the bending of the street lamp was really crude and the thing came right out of its shoes. So let's see, that's going to be, I believe, in this background layer. And there it is. So here's the puppet tool applied to that. And there are 3 pins, that's fine. And I think that I could have given you more detail on how to adjust these things. So let's see, puppet, and let me make my timeline a little bigger here so we can see what's here. So there are pins, which I can reveal with the Uber key, and one of them is keyframe, this one in the middle. Starting with the bottom one, number 1, I would change the type here. And I would go ahead and make this one, instead of a position, an advanced. And that is going to separate the rotation from the position or the scale. And that allows me to preserve its orientation so it's still sitting on the ground. Moving up to the next pin, the one that's animated, this was very common to have these sharp bends. And so what you would do is, with the tool selected, use its tools up here. You can do things like show the mesh, so that's turned on and now enabled, so you can see the mesh around it. And I can expand it. And by expanding it, I can soften that curve. I can also change the density. It's set pretty high. If I make it even higher, you get even a little bit more refinement. And I think that's just a nicer look. One more thing in this project that I wanted to point out, there was sort of what seems like a cry for help here, just soloing the element for a moment, or all these layers. This is the spellcast, and it has been screened and then multiply comped on top of itself. And the only difference between the layers is that they have different rotations on them. So it's the same element in all 4 90-degree rotations. And on the one hand, this is not an unfamiliar technique to me, but there's a couple things I wanted to get super clear about it. First of all, if you're going to build up additive modes like this, I would think, no, rather, I would know that you would want to use add mode. Screen is effectively a watered down version of add. It's gamma down. So you see those got a little brighter. So that's just a starting point. If you ever wanted to build up layers this way, and the normal way you would do it would actually be to take the one above and maybe give it some blur or something else to actually kind of bloom out the one below it. Whereas in this case, I think it was an effort to just make them brighter, because if you look at just one by itself, Now I've got them all soloed, so I can't really easily do this, but I'll just select them all, turn them off. It's pretty dim, and if we bring back just the background layer as well, barely shows up at all. So I understood why the student was doing this. Furthermore, what I would do, I'll just solo one of each of them. Let's say that we do want all 4 angles. So I'm just going to get one example of each of those and solo it here. And, probably pre-comp these together so they're just one element. But either way, let's take, let's just take one of them right now. And I'm just going to throw an exposure effect on here. So rather than just layering them together multiple times, you could, instead of having 4 add layers, just set exposure to 4. And that's going to make them just as bright. I'll just copy that, paste it to the other ones. And now you can see that we are back to where that student wanted to get to with this element. So I think that the student got into kind of a hurry. Here you can see that the organization of the project kind of started getting a little bit more haphazard here at the end. So it's understandable, but it also had an underlying confusion that I just wanted to make sure we cleared up. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it for this review. We covered a lot, and I hope you enjoyed it.